Why was the life of a stonemason during the building of a castle often shorter than that of a soldier on the front lines? And how could a single, poorly measured block of limestone not only bring down a wall, but also lead to a baron's swift and final execution? The answer lies not in architecture, but in the brutal calculus of power. A castle is born from an act of violence against the landscape itself. Before it is a home, before it is a fortress, it is a wound carved into the earth, demanding a sacrifice of blood, sweat, and coin. The year is 1141. Baron de Courcy has chosen this windswept hill overlooking the river crossing not for its beauty, but for its strategic cruelty. From here, his archers can command the trade route. From here, his knights can ride down upon his rivals in the valley. But first, the stone giant must be raised. This is not a construction site. It is a military encampment under constant threat. Every night, the forest beyond the cleared ground whispers with the movements of saboteurs sent by a neighboring lord. A man who knows this castle's completion spells his own ruin. Every cart of timber, every block of quarried stone arrives under armed guard. The master mason does not sleep in a tent, but in a fortified hut, a heavy sword lying next to his drafting tools. He knows his life is worth more to the enemy than that of any knight. The workers are a desperate collection of souls, serfs conscripted from their fields, their hands raw and unaccustomed to the bite of stone and rope. Mercenaries who will dig a ditch or slit a throat for the same wage. And condemned prisoners offered a slim chance of freedom in exchange for the most perilous work, dangling from wicker scaffolding hundreds of feet in the air, setting stones with nothing but a prayer between them and the jagged rocks below. The mortality rate is staggering. A slipped rope, a collapsing trench, a splintered timber in the primitive cranes. Death is a daily, unremarkable event. A man falls, his screams swallowed by the clang of hammers. He is dragged away, and another takes his place before his body is cold. There are no safety measures, only the baron's unyielding deadline. Winter approaches, and the walls must be high enough to repel an attack before the first snow. This urgency breeds a unique form of terror. A foreman who pushes his crew too hard might find a dagger in his back during a drunken brawl. A worker caught shirking is flogged, his cries a grim soundtrack to the labor. But the greatest fear is that of the baron himself. He stalks the site, his mailed fist a constant reminder of the price of failure. One day, a section of the newly built curtain wall settles, a hairline crack appearing near its base. The master mason is summoned, his face pale with dread. The baron does not shout, he simply points to the floor with the tip of his sword, and then to the gallows hastily erected on the first day of construction. The message is clear. The wall is torn down and rebuilt, the cost in time and silver secondary to the cost of perceived weakness. Legends are born in this mud and fear. An old woman from a nearby village whispers that the land itself rejects the fortress, that the stones will not hold unless they are given a living soul. A rumor spreads through the camp like a fever. A child was purchased from destitute parents and walled up alive within the foundation, a grim offering to the ancient spirits of the hill. Is it true? It almost doesn't matter. The men believe it, and they work with a renewed, terrified vigor, as if their own lives depend on appeasing the thirsty stone. A castle is a monument not to faith, like a cathedral, but to one man's fear of his own mortality. It is an act of defiance against a chaotic world, an attempt to impose order through sheer mass and intimidation. Every stone is a testament to the baron's will, every battlement a snarl at his enemies. He is not building a home, he is forging a weapon and writing his name upon the land in a script of granite and fear. In the Middle Ages, walls were built not to keep the enemy out, but to keep the horror in. And as the final stones of the keep are winched into place, as the raw timber of the gatehouse is hung, a new kind of horror is just beginning to fester within its freshly completed shell. The sweat of 1,000 men has turned to stone, and the blood of 100 more has mortared it together. Now, with the last scaffold down, the Baron raised a goblet in the great hall, surrounded by his court. The real war, the one of whispers and smiles, was about to begin. The Baron's decision to wall up a man in the foundation was a desperate measure rooted in pagan fear. Do you believe this was an act of necessary savagery to protect his people, or a sign of unforgivable tyranny? Share your choice in the comments. The Great Hall is the heart of the beast, and its lifeblood is a volatile mixture of wine, ambition, and paranoia. On the night of the first feast, the air is thick with the smell of roasting meat, wood smoke, and unwashed bodies. Torches spit and crackle, casting flickering shadows that dance like devils on the high, timbered ceiling. The stones are still new, so new they seem to sweat in the heat, the mortar barely cured. But the human drama unfolding within these walls is as old as time. The Baron sits at the high table on a raised dais, a position of seemingly unassailable power. But he is a prisoner on his own throne. To his right sits his wife, a woman from a rival clan, their marriage a fragile truce that could shatter with a single misplaced word. To his left, his younger brother, whose loyalty is as thin as the watered-down wine served to the lower benches. The Baron watches everyone, his eyes constantly scanning the hall. He notes which knight laughs too loudly at his brother's jests, which courtier whispers to his wife's lady-in-waiting. A feast is not a celebration. It is an intelligence-gathering operation. The seating arrangement itself is a brutal map of the castle's power structure. The high table is for blood and strategic alliance. Below them sit the landed knights, men who owe the Baron military service in exchange for their own small fiefdoms. Their loyalty is a commodity, bought with promises of land and tempered with threats. Then come the household knights, the landless warriors who form the Baron's personal retinue. They are hungry, dangerous young men, their only path to wealth and status running through the battlefield. They watch the landed knights with envy and the Baron with a predator's focus. At the furthest, darkest end of the hall, near the draughty doors, are the lesser functionaries, the steward, the reeve, the master of the hunt. They are the gears of the castle machine, and their resentment is a slow, burning fire. Every cup of wine is a potential chalice of poison. The Baron's taster, a pale, nervous man, takes a sip from the Lord's goblet and a bite from his bread before the Baron himself will touch it. A high-risk, high-reward profession. Surviving a year in the job meant a generous pension. Failing meant a very public and agonizing death, a fate that befell the previous taster just last spring. Etiquette is a weapon more deadly than a mace. A perceived slight, a failure to stand when the Baron enters, a jest that lands poorly. Any of these can lead to a loss of favor, which in this world means a loss of land, status, and quite possibly life. The jester, a man whose official role is to be a fool, is often the most astute political observer in the room. He alone can speak truth to power, cloaked in riddles and rhymes. His jokes about a neighboring duke's unfortunate parentage are a calculated diplomatic insult, a message sent without spilling a single drop of ink. Could you survive this deadly theatre? Could you navigate the currents of envy and ambition without making a fatal misstep? The splendor is a carefully crafted illusion. The silver goblets on the high table are real, but the bread, served to the knights on the lower benches, is cut with sawdust to make the flour last. The imported wine the Baron drinks is a symbol of his wealth, while the garrison drinks sour ale that is little more than fermented water. This disparity is the engine of the castle's internal politics. The hungry knight dreams of replacing the well-fed one. The Baron's brother dreams of sitting on the dais. The wife dreams of her son inheriting it all, a dream that might be hastened by her husband's sudden demise. The Lord's justice is swift and theatrical, designed to reinforce his authority. The day after the feast, a stable hand is accused of stealing a silver spoon. He is dragged before the baron in the great hall, the remnants of the feast still littering the floor. There is no trial, no jury. The accuser is the steward whose word is law among the servants. The boy pleads his innocence, but his pleas are useless. He is sentenced to have his hand cut off, a public spectacle performed in the castle courtyard. The message to the rest of the staff is unambiguous. This is the price of theft. This is the price of challenging the established order. Yet beneath this iron-fisted rule, a secret world thrives. A world of coded glances, of secrets passed in the dark corridors, of plots hatched in the smoky kitchens and damp stables. It is the world of the invisible, those who serve and watch and wait. The castle is a city unto itself, and like any city, it has its slums. The world beyond the great hall, beyond the lord's private chambers, is a realm of perpetual twilight and stench. This is the domain of the invisible army, the hundreds of souls whose ceaseless grinding labor keeps the stone heart of the fortress beating. Their lives are governed not by chivalric codes, but by the raw, brutal necessities of survival. Step out of the hall and into the inner bailey, and the illusion of noble life shatters. The ground is a treacherous muck of mud, animal droppings, and human waste. There is no sewer system. Chamber pots from the Lord's chambers are unceremoniously emptied from windows, their contents mingling with the offal from the kitchens and the filth from the stables. The air hums with the buzz of flies and the reek of decay. This is the breeding ground for the castle's most relentless enemy, disease. An outbreak of dysentery could cripple a garrison more effectively than a month-long siege. A wandering rat carrying the plague could annihilate the entire population, from the baron in his chambers to the lowest scullery maid. The castle's water supply, drawn from a single well in the center of the courtyard, was a constant source of anxiety. Poisoning the well was a common tactic of saboteurs, but more often the well was contaminated by the castle's own filth seeping through the soil. Life for a soldier in the garrison is a monotonous cycle of guard duty, drills, and mind-numbing boredom, punctuated by moments of sheer terror. They sleep in communal barracks, crammed onto straw-filled pallets that teem with lice and fleas. Their diet consists of pottage, a bland, watery stew of grains and whatever vegetables are available, stale bread, and weak ale. Meat is a rare luxury, usually the scraps and bones from the Lord's table. Discipline is savage. A soldier caught sleeping on watch could be executed. Minor infractions are punished with the lash or the pillory, a public humiliation designed to enforce obedience through fear. The bond between these men is forged in shared misery, a cynical brotherhood that is the castle's first and last line of defense. The true engine room of the castle is the kitchen, a cavernous, smoke-blackened space where an army of cooks, bakers, and scullery maids toil from before sunrise to long after sunset. The heat is suffocating, the work backbreaking. They pluck hundreds of chickens, skin dozens of rabbits, and turn massive spits laden with roasting pigs. For the Lord's feast, they work for 2 days straight without sleep, their efforts culminating in a grand display they will never taste. The hierarchy here is as rigid as in the Great Hall. The head cook rules like a tyrant, his word law, his ladle a weapon against the lazy or clumsy. At the very bottom are the turnspits, often young boys forced to sit for hours by the searing heat of the fire, endlessly rotating the spits. It was a miserable, thankless job, considered one of the lowest in the entire castle hierarchy. And what of their small joys? A stolen piece of candied fruit, a moment of laughter shared over a bucket of dirty dishes, a forbidden romance blossoming in the hayloft. These are tiny sparks of light in an oppressive darkness, fleeting moments of humanity in a world that treats them as little more than livestock. Their rebellions are small and secret. A baker might accidentally burn a batch of the Lord's bread. A groom might neglect to properly polish the steward's saddle. A scullery maid might spit in the soup of a particularly cruel night. These are acts of quiet defiance, the only weapons available to the powerless. But their tragedies are immense and silent. A chambermaid who becomes pregnant by the Lord or one of his knights faces a terrible choice: a dangerous, secret abortion or being cast out to starve. A stable boy trampled by a spooked horse is quickly replaced, his life forgotten. Their deaths are unrecorded, their names lost to history. They are the foundation upon which the castle stands, as essential as the stone itself, and just as invisible. They live and die in the shadow of the great keep, their existence a constant, grueling struggle, yet their quiet resilience is a testament to the human spirit's ability to endure. And their endurance would be tested to its absolute limit when the horn sounded from the watchtower, signaling the approach of an enemy army. The greatest trial was at hand. The blast of a horn from the highest watchtower slices through the morning air. It is a sound that turns blood to ice. An army is on the horizon. The leisurely rotting peace of the castle is shattered. The siege has begun. Now the castle reveals its true purpose. It ceases to be a home and becomes what it was always meant to be, a machine for killing. The great gates are barred, the portcullis dropped with a thunderous crash. The inner bailey, once a chaotic marketplace of daily life, transforms into a frantic military depot. Women and children rush to haul buckets of water from the well, filling every available cask and barrel. Smiths work day and night, their forges roaring as they sharpen swords and forge new arrowheads. The walls, once silent observers, now teem with life and menace. Archers take their positions at the loopholes, their faces grim, their bowstrings taut. Men-at-arms stand ready with crossbows, their movements economical and deadly. Cauldrons of oil, water, and sand are heated over open fires, ready to be poured down on anyone foolish enough to approach the base of the wall. The world shrinks to the confines of these stone ramparts. The enemy camp, a sprawling city of tents and siege engines, is a constant, terrifying presence. At first, there is a sense of grim determination, even exhilaration. The defenders shout insults from the battlements, their bravado fueled by the seeming impregnability of their stone shield. The first assault is repelled with a hail of arrows and crossbow bolts. The screams of the wounded and dying below are a horrific, yet validating music to the ears of the garrison. They have held. The castle has protected them, but a siege is a war of attrition, a slow, strangling death. The enemy does not need to break the walls, they only need to wait. Days turn into weeks. The initial bravado evaporates, replaced by a gnawing anxiety. The true enemies are now inside the walls: hunger, thirst, and despair. The trebuchets begin their monstrous work. These giant catapults, assembled just out of arrow range, hurl massive stones against the walls day and night. Each impact is a physical blow to the castle's morale, a jarring reminder of the relentless force gathered against them. The constant, thunderous booming becomes the soundtrack of their existence, a rhythm of impending doom. Sometimes the projectiles are more insidious. The decaying carcass of a horse, a dead pig, or even the bodies of captured soldiers are launched over the walls. This is not merely a psychological attack, it is biological warfare in its most primitive and effective form. The rotting flesh contaminates the courtyard, spreading disease and fouling the precious water supply. Food rations are cut again and again. The bread is now mostly chaff. The ale is gone, replaced by strictly rationed water that tastes of mud and fear. The inhabitants begin to eye the castle's rats and pigeons with a new predatory interest. The dogs and horses are the next to be slaughtered for their meat. Could you make that choice, to kill a trusted animal to feed your family? The psychology of the besieged begins to decay. The cramped, unsanitary conditions breed paranoia. Old grudges flare into violent conflicts. A man is stabbed to death over a stolen crust of bread. The Baron's authority, once absolute, is now maintained purely by the swords of his household knights. Whispers of surrender begin to circulate, A group of merchants, their wealth trapped within the walls, secretly plot to open a postern gate in exchange for their lives and property. The greatest threat is no longer the army outside, but the traitors within. In the deepest desperation, the final taboo is broken. The chronicles are often silent on this, but archaeological evidence is not. The bones of the dead, gnawed and broken, tell a story of cannibalism, the ultimate act of survival in a world that has descended into hell. The castle, designed to be a sanctuary, has become a tomb that eats its own inhabitants. Yet, even in this abyss, there are flashes of incredible courage. A small band of knights might launch a desperate nighttime raid, a sortie into the enemy camp to burn a siege engine or capture supplies. It is a suicidal mission, but it is a choice to die on one's feet rather than starve on one's knees. And on the walls, among the grime and the blood, stand the women whose fight is just as desperate. What would you choose, to die of starvation in a besieged fortress, or to risk everything and make a daring raid on the enemy's camp? Let us know if you would be a defender or an attacker in the comments below. The image of the medieval noblewoman, a delicate creature in a silk gown languidly doing embroidery while waiting for her knight to return from war, is one of history's most persistent and misleading fictions. The reality was far harsher, and the lady of the castle, the chatelaine, was often as tough and pragmatic as the stone walls she commanded. When the baron rode off to war, he did not leave his fortress in the hands of his most trusted knight. He left it in the hands of his wife. She became the de facto commander, responsible not only for the domestic management of the estate, but for its military defense. The keys that hung from her belt were not just for the pantry and the linen closet, they were for the armory, the treasury, and the dungeon. She was the quartermaster, the judge, and the general. She had to understand supply lines, manage payrolls for the garrison, and oversee the stockpiling of grain and arrows. She held court, settling disputes among vassals and villagers with an authority backed by her husband's name and her own shrewdness. In the event of a siege, her role transformed from manager to military leader. While she might not have worn armor or wielded a sword, her command was absolute. It was the chatelaine who stood on the battlements, directing the defense, ordering the distribution of resources, and, most importantly, maintaining morale. Her calm resolve in the face of terror could mean the difference between a successful defense and a catastrophic surrender. The chronicles are filled with accounts of these formidable women. In the year 1155, when the castle of an English lord was besieged while he was away, his pregnant wife not only led the defense, but also donned a mail shirt and appeared on the walls to inspire her troops, even as enemy archers targeted her directly. She understood that leadership was a performance, and her courage shamed any man who thought of wavering. But their battlefield was not only on the ramparts. Women were the castle's medical corps. They prepared bandages, fetched water for the wounded, and used their knowledge of herbal remedies to treat injuries and illnesses. It was a grim and thankless task. With no understanding of antiseptics, infection was rampant, and a minor arrow wound could easily become a fatal case of gangrene. Their task was to offer comfort in a world that offered very little. Childbirth was a private war waged within the castle walls, a battle with a mortality rate as high as any military campaign. To give birth was to face death. Infections, hemorrhages, and complications that are now easily treatable were then death sentences for both mother and child. A castle's graveyard was filled with the tiny headstones of infants, and the larger ones of women who died in the childbed. A noble family might produce 10 children in the hope that 2 or 3 would survive to adulthood. This constant proximity to death gave these women a resilience that is hard for us to comprehend. For the vast majority of women in the castle, the servants, the laundresses, the kitchen maids, life was an entirely different kind of struggle. Their bodies were not their own. They were vulnerable to the whims and violence of the soldiers and knights they served. A pretty maidservant was considered a perquisite of a knight's service. Resistance could mean a beating or dismissal, which was a sentence to starvation. Their lives were a tightrope walk of survival, navigating the dangers of hard labor and the predatory attentions of powerful men. Yet they too played a crucial role during a siege. They were the ones who carried the heavy buckets of sand to douse fires, who hauled stones and arrows up the winding stairs to the wall walk, who cared for the children and the elderly huddled in the relative safety of the keep. They were the sinews of the castle's resistance, an anonymous army whose contributions were essential but rarely recorded. These were not the women of romance and song. They were pragmatists, survivors, and sometimes ruthless commanders. They understood the castle's cruel logic. It was a machine of power, and in that machine, sentiment was a weakness. They fought their battles not only with courage and fortitude, but also with prayer, hoping that a higher power was watching over their precarious existence. Within the cold, damp walls of every castle, two parallel worlds existed. One was the world of steel, politics, and brutal physical reality. The other was a world of shadows, whispers, and a profound, suffocating fear of the unseen. Faith was the bedrock of medieval life, but it was a faith riddled with deep-seated superstition, a constant battle between the teachings of the Church and the older, darker beliefs that oozed from the land itself. The castle chapel was the spiritual heart of the fortress, but it was also a political tool. The castle priest or chaplain was not just a man of God. He was often a trusted advisor to the Lord, a diplomat, and a record keeper. His literacy made him invaluable. He wrote the Lord's letters, maintained the household accounts, and educated the Lord's children. His sermons could be used to bolster morale during a siege or to condemn a rival lord, framing political conflicts as a struggle between good and evil. The most precious treasure in the castle was not the Lord's gold, but its holy relic. This could be anything from a splinter of wood purported to be from the true cross to the finger bone of a saint. The relic was believed to provide divine protection. It was paraded along the battlements during an attack, a sacred shield against the enemy's arrows and stones. The loss or capture of the relic was considered a catastrophic omen, a sign that God had abandoned the fortress. But beneath this veneer of official Christianity, pagan beliefs endured. The soldiers muttered ancient charms to ward off evil spirits before going on night watch. The kitchen maids left offerings of milk for the brownie, a household spirit believed to help with chores if appeased, or cause chaos if offended. These superstitions were a way of coping with a world that was unpredictable and terrifying. If God was distant and concerned with grand matters, the local spirits of the well, the hearth, and the forest were immediate and personal. This mixture of faith and fear created a fertile ground for paranoia. The castle, with its dark corners, its strange noises, and its history of violence, was a natural breeding ground for ghost stories. Every fortress had its tale of a spectral lady wandering the ramparts, searching for a lost lover, or the groans of a tortured prisoner echoing up from the dungeons. These stories were more than just entertainment. They were a way of processing the castle's brutal past, of giving voice to the suffering that its stones had absorbed. And where there was fear of ghosts, there was a greater, more active fear of witches. A sudden illness that struck the Lord's cattle, a crop failure, a difficult childbirth, all could be blamed on malevolent witchcraft. An accusation of heresy or witchcraft was a terrifyingly effective weapon for eliminating personal enemies. An unpopular servant, a rival for the Lord's affections, or an old woman with a knowledge of herbal medicine could suddenly find themselves accused. Once the accusation was made, the hysteria was almost impossible to contain. The accused would be dragged to the dungeons, places of absolute darkness and despair. Torture was not seen as a punishment, but as a legitimate means of extracting a confession. The rack, the thumbscrew, the iron boot, these instruments were designed to inflict unimaginable pain, to break the body until the soul admitted to anything. Under such duress, people would confess to flying on broomsticks, to copulating with the devil, to casting evil spells. These forced confessions then proved the existence of a conspiracy, leading to more accusations, more torture, and more executions. The castle, the symbol of order and protection, became a microcosm of the witch hunts that would plague Europe for centuries. It became a theatre of religious fanaticism, where the fear of an invisible, supernatural enemy turned neighbors into accusers and innocents into victims. The true monsters were not the demons of superstition, but the ones residing within the human heart, unleashed by fear and suspicion. The castle's thick walls, meant to protect from outside threats, were tragically effective at trapping the terror within, proving that the most dangerous sieges are those waged against the mind. This internal rot of suspicion was often far more destructive than any external army, leading to betrayals that could bring down the most powerful dynasties. The thickest walls, the deepest moats, the most loyal garrison, none of these could protect a lord from the enemy who slept in the next chamber. The greatest threat to the life of a castle was not the battering ram at the gate, but the poisoned chalice at the high table and the dagger in a kinsman's hand. The history of these stone fortresses is written in the blood of family feuds, sibling rivalries, and spousal betrayals. A castle was not just a military installation, it was a prize. The ultimate symbol of power and wealth, it was the focal point of dynastic ambition. And ambition, in the medieval world, was a license to commit murder. The struggle for inheritance was the most common catalyst for these internal wars. The principle of primogeniture, where the eldest son inherited everything, was designed to keep estates intact, but it bred a deep and venomous resentment in younger sons. A younger brother, with no land and no title, faced a bleak future as a household knight or a clergyman. The temptation to hasten his older brother's demise was often overwhelming. A hunting accident, a sudden and violent illness after a meal, a fall from a horse with a suspiciously frayed saddle girth. History is filled with these convenient deaths that paved the way for a new lord. Fratricide was the dark secret of many noble houses. The family unit, supposedly the bedrock of society, was a viper's nest of competing interests. A lord's wife, trapped in a political marriage to a man she despised, might conspire with a lover, perhaps an ambitious knight or even her husband's own brother, to secure her freedom and her son's inheritance. A whispered conversation in a secluded chapel, a secret potion obtained from a woman on the edge of the village, a gate left conveniently unbarred on the night of a surprise attack. These were the weapons of the seemingly powerless. To facilitate these conspiracies, the castle itself had its secrets. Beyond the public spaces of the hall and the chapel lay a hidden geography of intrigue. Secret passages concealed behind tapestries or pivoting stone blocks allowed for unseen movement through the fortress. Tiny spy holes, known as listening ears, were built into the walls of great halls and private chambers, allowing the lord or his enemies to eavesdrop on conversations. These architectural features turned the entire castle into a theatre of paranoia. Could you betray your lord to save your family from slaughter? No one could be trusted. The loyal knight could be bought. The devoted servant could be blackmailed. The loving wife could be a conspirator. The lord was surrounded by people, yet he was utterly alone, the prisoner of his own power. Poison was the weapon of choice for the discreet assassin. Arsenic, known as inheritance powder, was colorless, odorless, and easily mixed with food or wine. Its symptoms, violent stomach cramps, vomiting, mimicked those of dysentery, a common and fatal illness, making it the perfect tool for murder. The constant fear of poison among the nobility was not paranoia, it was a sensible precaution. This is why lords employed food tasters and why powerful guests often traveled with their own cooks. But the most devastating betrayal came during a siege. The promise of gold or the threat of death to one's family could turn even a trusted captain of the guard. A traitor could signal to the enemy when the garrison was at its weakest, sabotage the water supply, or, most effectively, open a small, unguarded postern gate in the dead of night. For the price of one man's soul, an entire fortress could fall in a matter of minutes. The castle was a golden cage, and its inhabitants were constantly testing the bars, searching for a way to climb higher, even if it meant stepping on the bodies of their own kin. The bonds of family, loyalty, and honor were tragically fragile, easily broken by the relentless pressure of ambition. The internal wars, fought with whispers, lies, and poison, were often far more destructive than the grand, glorious battles that filled the songs of the minstrels. It was a quieter, uglier form of combat, a tournament of shadows where the prize was everything and the rules were non-existent. Would you risk your life for a chance at power, knowing your closest relatives might be your assassins? The choice between dying a pawn or living as a king is rarely a simple one. Tell us your choice in the comments. The brutal reality of constant warfare, both internal and external, required a warrior class that was permanently honed for battle. The knightly tournament, often romanticized as a chivalrous pageant of skill and honor, was in fact a full-contact, high-stakes training ground for war, a spectacle of organized violence that often blurred the line between sport and slaughter. Forget the image of two knights in gleaming armor politely jousting for a lady's favor. The centerpiece of the early medieval tournament was the melee, a simulated cavalry battle that was anything but simulated. Two teams of knights, sometimes numbering in the hundreds, would line up at opposite ends of a vast field. At the signal, they would charge, crashing into each other with a sound like thunder. It was chaos, a maelstrom of splintering lances, screaming horses, and the percussive crunch of steel on steel. The objective was not simply to unhorse an opponent, but to capture him and hold him for ransom. A knight's armor, weapons, and warhorse represented a fortune. A successful day at a tournament could make a landless knight rich. A bad day could lead to financial ruin, crippling injury, or death. The blunted weapons used were only marginally safer than their battlefield equivalents. A lance might have a three-pronged tip to distribute the impact, but it could still shatter ribs and puncture organs. Swords were dulled, but a heavy blow to the helmet could still cause a fatal concussion. Many a knight who rode onto the tournament field in the morning was carried off it, dead or maimed, by evening. The church repeatedly condemned tournaments, viewing them as a sinful display of vanity and violence, but its prohibitions were largely ignored. The allure of glory, riches, and the sheer adrenaline of the fight was too strong. These events were a crucial part of the military and social fabric. They were where young knights made a name for themselves, where lords scouted for talented warriors to hire, and where the latest techniques in mounted combat were developed and refined. The tournament was also a political arena. A powerful king or duke would host a grand tournament to display his wealth and military might, to intimidate his rivals, and to forge alliances. Invitations were a matter of high diplomacy. To be excluded was a grave insult. The seating of the ladies in the viewing stands, the awarding of prizes, the choice of the Queen of Love and Beauty, every element was laden with political significance. But there was a darker side to this culture of glorified violence. A knight's honor was a fragile and explosive thing. A dispute over the rules, an accusation of cheating, or a personal rivalry could easily escalate from the tournament field into a private war, a deadly feud between two noble houses. Furthermore, the knightly class, trained for little else but combat, could be a destabilizing force. When there was no official war to fight, unemployed knights sometimes turned to banditry, terrorizing the very countryside they were supposed to protect. The chivalric code, with its ideals of protecting the weak and honoring God, was often a thin veneer over a much more brutal reality. In the heat of the melee, that veneer was stripped away, revealing the raw, competitive, and often merciless nature of the medieval warrior. The crack of a breaking bone was a far more common sound than the recital of a romantic poem. It was a world where a man's worth was measured by his prowess in the saddle and his ability to inflict violence. The tournament was the ultimate expression of this worldview, a festival of steel and glory where men gambled their lives for a chance at fortune. This entire system, this cult of the armored man on horseback, was predicated on the supremacy of the castle as a base of operations and the knight as the ultimate weapon. But a change was coming, a foul-smelling, smoke-belching change that would render both the knight and his stone fortress obsolete. For centuries, the castle was the undisputed king of the battlefield. It was the anchor of military strategy, the ultimate defense. An army could win a dozen battles in the open field, but if its enemy could retreat behind stone walls, the campaign would grind to a halt in a costly, time-consuming siege. The balance of power was overwhelmingly in favor of the defender. This reality shaped the entire political and social landscape of the feudal world. But in the mid-14th century, a new sound began to echo across the battlefields of Europe. It was a deafening, terrifying roar, a sound that seemed to come from the bowels of hell itself. It was the sound of gunpowder. The first cannons were crude, unreliable, and almost as dangerous to their operators as to the enemy. They were massive, unwieldy tubes of cast iron or bronze, capable of firing heavy stone or iron balls. Their range was short, their accuracy abysmal, and their rate of fire pathetic. At first, defenders of castles scoffed at these new toys. The thick stone walls that had withstood trebuchets for generations would surely stand against these noisy contraptions. They were wrong. The science of ballistics was in its infancy, but its power was undeniable. While a trebuchet hurled a stone in a high arc, relying on gravity and dead weight to do damage, a cannonball flew in a relatively flat trajectory, striking the wall with a focused, percussive force it was never designed to withstand. The impact did not just chip away at the stone, it sent shock waves through the masonry, cracking and weakening the entire structure. A relentless day-long bombardment by a battery of cannons could achieve what a year of conventional siege warfare could not. It could punch a hole right through a curtain wall. The psychological impact was just as profound as the physical one. The thunderous noise, the clouds of black smoke, the sight of a solid iron ball smashing into a tower that had stood for 200 years, it was a terrifying spectacle. It signaled a fundamental shift in the art of war. The age of stone was giving way to the age of gunpowder. The defenders frantically tried to adapt. They reinforced their walls, packing them with earth to absorb the impact of the cannonballs. They built angled earthen bastions in front of their stone walls to deflect shots. They even started mounting their own small cannons on the battlements. But they were fighting a losing battle. Castle architecture, with its high vertical walls and tall square towers, was perfectly designed to be a target for artillery. A new style of fortress was needed, one with low, thick, sloping walls that could better resist cannon fire. The age of the Star Fort had begun, but the age of the knightly castle was over. The knight himself, the armored champion of the battlefield, was also facing obsolescence. His expensive plate armor, which could turn aside a sword blade or an arrow, was useless against a lead ball fired from a crude handgun or arquebus. An untrained peasant with a few weeks of practice could now kill a knight who had spent a lifetime mastering the arts of war. The entire social and military order of feudalism, built upon the supremacy of the mounted knight, began to crumble. Castles did not disappear overnight. They continued to be used as residences, administrative centers, and prisons. Some were retrofitted with gun platforms and continued to have military value for a time. But their primary function, their role as the ultimate instrument of power, was gone. They became magnificent, expensive dinosaurs, symbols of a bygone era. A lord's power was no longer measured by the height of his towers, but by the number and quality of his cannons. The twilight of these stone giants was a slow, melancholy process. They stood, silent and increasingly irrelevant, as the world changed around them. The din of the tournament gave way to the crack of musketry drills. The age of chivalry, with its castles and knights, faded into legend, a romantic memory of a world that had been blown apart by the relentless march of technology. The silenced fortresses began to fall into disrepair. their halls growing quiet, their walls slowly surrendering to ivy and the passage of time. The war is over. The dynasty has died out. The roof has collapsed. The once mighty castle enters its final, longest stage, its journey into ruin. Abandoned, it becomes a ghost of itself, a stone skeleton picked clean by time and scavengers. For centuries, the local villagers see it not as a historical monument, but as a convenient pre-cut quarry. They cart away its stones to build their own homes, churches, and livestock pens. The great keep is slowly dismantled, the curtain walls crumble, until only a jagged silhouette remains on the hill, a silent testament to forgotten power. Nature reclaims its territory with a slow, inexorable patience. Ivy snakes its way through arrow slits, its roots prying apart the mortar that held the stones together. Trees sprout in the middle of the great hall, their branches reaching up through the collapsed roof towards the sky. The moat silts up, becoming a marshy bog. Owls and bats make their homes in the dark, crumbling towers. The castle becomes a wild, haunted place, a landmark in the landscape of the imagination. And with the decay of stone comes the birth of legend. The castle's violent history, its memories of sieges, murders, and tragedies, seeps into the local folklore. The stories of spectral ladies, rattling chains, and ghostly knights are the echoes of real human suffering, transformed by generations of fireside storytelling. The buried treasure of a long-dead baron becomes a tantalizing myth, a whispered promise of riches guarded by a terrible curse. The castle is no longer a place of history, but a place of magic and fear. Then, in the 18th and 19th centuries, a new kind of visitor arrives. The Romantics, poets, painters, and aristocrats on their grand tours, see not a derelict fortress or a quarry, but a sublime and beautiful ruin. They are captivated by its melancholy grandeur, its connection to a lost age of chivalry and adventure. They write poems about its ivy-clad walls, paint dramatic landscapes of its crumbling towers under stormy skies, and host lavish picnics in its overgrown courtyards. The castle is reborn again, this time as a work of art, a backdrop for Gothic novels and romantic fantasies. This fascination soon gives way to a more scientific curiosity. The age of archaeology begins. Men with shovels and notebooks replace the poets and treasure hunters. They begin to systematically excavate the ruins, treating the castle not as a source of legend, but as a priceless historical document. They are not looking for chests of gold, they are looking for the truth, and what they find is far more valuable. In the layers of soil that have accumulated over the centuries, they uncover the castle's lost secrets. They find the foundations of the original wooden fort that stood here before the stone one. In the filled-in well, they discover a time capsule of discarded items, broken pottery, leather shoes, the hilt of a dagger. In the latrine pits, they find fish bones and fruit seeds that tell them what the garrison ate. They unearth the skeletons of soldiers from the final siege, some still with arrowheads embedded in their bones. They find a child's toy, a small wooden horse, dropped and lost in the courtyard 800 years ago. They find the evidence of the diseases, the hunger, the daily grind. Each fragment is a word, each layer a sentence in the true story of the castle. Through the patient work of archaeologists, the stones begin to speak again. They tell us not of noble knights and fair ladies, but of the brutal realities of construction, the paranoia of court life, the filth and disease of the inner bailey, and the sheer terror of a siege. They reveal the lives of the invisible people, the servants, the soldiers, the women, whose stories were never written down. The castle, in its final state of decay, becomes its most honest self. Stripped of its power, its splendor, and its myths, it offers us a direct connection to the past. It stands as a silent witness, a monument not to a single man's ambition, but to the enduring and often brutal struggle of the human spirit. Today, we walk through these ruins as tourists, taking pictures where blood was once spilled. But the stones remember. They remember the sweat of the builders, the tears of the besieged, and the whisper of the assassin. Imagine you could make a choice. Would you preserve this castle as a beautiful, silent monument for future generations to admire? Or would you seize a one-time chance to witness one day of its true, brutal, vibrant life as it actually was? What would you choose? Let us know in the comments.